Hey everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And Wargaming just released the HWK 30, which is a tier 8 German premium light tank, and I'm going to let you know whether I feel it's worth a pickup. So before we get stuck into some gameplay, let's see how the HWK 30 stacks up to the M4190, aka the German Bulldog, the M41D, aka the Chinese Bulldog or Taiwanese Bulldog, and the standard German tier 8 light tank, the HWK 12. Immediately we notice that the 90mm main armament that this vehicle has packs 240 alpha damage, which is better than the Taiwanese tank and comparable to that of the Bulldog and the HWK 12. However, the damage per minute of the vehicle falls significantly behind the M41D, the M4190, but it does outshine the standard vehicle, the HWK 12. Now this vehicle gets some very interesting ammunition. It gets APCR as standard, which gives it a better shell velocity than the M4190. Furthermore, on top of this, it has better standard penetration by 5mm, but remember, you are going to get some shell drop off over long range and have slightly less normalization. However, where the HWK 30 really shines are its premium rounds. These high explosive anti-tank rounds are very similar to that of the M4190D. However, while they do pack the same amount of penetration, 250, which is vastly better than the penetration that you'll get on the M41D, look at this shell velocity, 1,145. That's better shell velocity than the APCR rounds had. And it's actually the same as the RU-251, the Tier 9 German light tank. And interestingly enough, all three forms of ammunition on this vehicle have way better shell velocity than the HWK-12, which literally struggles with 338 meters a second shell velocity on its high explosive rounds. One thing that I love about the M4190 are its very special high explosive rounds with 320 alpha damage and 102 millimeters of penetration, and the HWK-30 has these exact same rounds, which definitely give these two tanks a huge advantage against lightly armored opponents and a definitive edge over the M41D. Alright, now let's move on to gun handling, and the vehicle's aim time here at 2.1 seconds, while it's by no means bad, is the worst in this comparison. Even worse than the HWK-12, 0.3 seconds worse than the Black Dog, and 0.6 seconds worse than the M41D. However, its accuracy, not bad at 0.36, that's better than the Black Dog, slightly worse than the Taiwanese tank. But this vehicle has the best dispersion when moving, but the worst dispersion when turning the turret. And so I guess you want to be sniping on the move in this vehicle. And that turret traverse dispersion at 0.1 compared to the Taiwanese tank's 0.06 definitely means that you probably want to take higher vertical stabilizers on this tank to be able to even that out, unless you have a legendary crew. Alright, now onto the gun depression. 10 degrees is fantastic. Much better than the Black Dog, and a degree better than the relatively new M41D. So if you're looking to play this vehicle on a ridgeline, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. However, be warned, the vehicle has a big old butt over the back of the tank, and so don't expect to have that same gun depression over the back of the hull. Next up, mobility. And this vehicle has a very impressive 70 km/h top speed limit and 24 backwards, which allows you to go faster backwards than some tanks can go forwards, which is rather nice. And while your top speed limit is just a touch lower than the Black Dog, it's way better than the M41D and the HWK-12. Combine this with an impressive power to weight advantage over the Black Dog, and this thing is rapid, but not as rapid as the M41D or the HWK-12. On the other hand, this vehicle has the worst effective traverse on all three terrain types in this comparison, but it's by still no means bad. Next up, let's talk about the armor on this vehicle, and it practically has none. And so if you see one of these tanks, load some high explosive rounds and you're most likely to be doing extra damage to it. But at least the tank has a 50 hit point advantage compared to the other three vehicles here, and its engine is actually more robust at 360 hit points. Finally, let's talk about the view range of this vehicle. It's 410. That is absolutely phenomenal, and if you have an exceptionally skilled crew like me and you're willing to use vents, coated optics, and a chocolate consumable, you are packing 519 meters view range in this vehicle. That is enough to see every heavy tank in the game, even when they're stationary at max distance, and you're most likely going to be spotting the larger medium tanks when they're moving, and tank destroyers, the larger ones, even when they're stationary. One thing that a lot of drivers will like about this view range advantage is that it actually allows you to probably drop vents and use vertical stabilizers instead if you absolutely love shooting and scooting. However, I personally felt that the vehicle, with its 10 degrees of gun depression, is more of kind of like a ridgeline shooter, and so I dropped those to be able to give myself an edge in other areas. Now, if you're planning to train up your Rheinmetall Panzerwagen crew, then the HWK-30 will be a great place for them, but make sure you have the addition of a loader, which I have in my RU-251. But I think that's quite enough of the talking. Let's get to the shooting. So here we go, we're rolling out on Ghost Town. We're in a nice matchup here, 3 tiers spread. There's lots of tier 6s on the enemy team, and this vehicle does really feel like a bit of a predator against tier 6 tanks. It kind of feels as if it's as close to a medium tank as you can really get, while still having a lot of the advantages the light tanks have. Let's be honest, Wargaming, when they introduced the Black Dog into the game, made a very good vehicle that was actually a tier 9 tank. That then, when they changed the matchmaking for all of the light tanks, they didn't nerf the statistics of the vehicle. The Black Dog is just a very, very good, if not overpowered, tier 8 premium tank. At tier 8, it kind of has the statistics of a tier 9 light tank, but having it at tier 8. And so, considering that we just saw that the HWK 30, while there are some areas that the Black Dog is superior to this tank, there are definitely areas where the HWK 30 is superior. You're starting to get an idea of where I might be going with this. Alright, so we're playing on Ghost Town here. When I'm playing on Ghost Town, I always like to try and dominate a flank. I'm either going to dominate the south or I'm going to dominate the north. One thing that I found is that a lot of people prefer to camp in this northern area than camp in the southern area. I don't know why that is, but it seems to be just working out a lot like that. And so if I'm attacking on the enemy team, I vastly prefer to try and win through the south, because usually there are tank destroyers sneaking around the northeast. But luckily, I'm defending here, and so my plan is to try and get forwards and try and take out this heavy tank, the IS-2, as he advances at me. Now, I'm firing heat rounds on this vehicle because I think this was the second game that I played in the tank, and I really wanted to get a vibe of just what this shell velocity is like. And it just they don't really feel like you're firing heat rounds on this thing. They almost feel like you're firing decent APCR rounds. Well, not decent, because something like the M41D is packing 1,400 meters a second on its premium rounds, but they're by no means shabby. And so to have a tier 8 light tank with 250 penetration, yeah, there are a lot of tier 8 medium tanks that kind of don't have that amount of penetration at tier 8, right? And it definitely gives the vehicle a nice advantage. I want to show you all of the different kinds of ammunition that the vehicle can use in this game, as we're going to be checking them out. And I feel like in this kind of a game, when you see that you've already lost 4 of your vehicles, one shot bounce could just put you behind enough that you're not going to be able to then keep killing the enemy quick enough to shut them down. And when you're playing tanks with 2,500 DPM, 2,800 DPM, a miss is not the end of the world. But remember, this vehicle has 2,000 base. It's going to take you lots of time to even take out tier 6 tanks, let alone tier 7 or 8 vehicles on the enemy team. Now, one thing that is rather nice about having this 240 alpha damage, and I've really been noticing that since I've been playing my EBR 105 recently. Where are you going with this? Just bear with me. Is that when you've got such a good rate of fire as you have with a 90mm gun at tier 8, firing, 7.5, over 8 rounds a minute, then that allows you to actually keep your opponents tracked. I've been playing the EBR 105, which, while it does have a nice, meaty 105mm gun, I'm going to be loading high explosive here to try and kill the IKV in a single shot, but I don't get to because the 45 TP gets me. But one thing that I've been struggling with the higher alpha damage guns with their poor rate of fire, is that you just can't keep people locked down enough. Now, I'm firing high explosive here. They have 320 average damage and 102mm of penetration. And remember, the shell velocity is not all that bad. So we just took out that 40 TP in 3 shots, and the final shot only had to do 100 damage. Now we fire one through the side of a 45 TP. That's a tier 7 heavy tank that we just put 373 damage through. That's a high roll after 2 flat on average rolls with the first 2 shots. And you're noticing that this tank, yeah, it can really start to pack some damage, right, ladies and gents? When you get behind a lightly armored vehicle, it doesn't matter that it has that 2,000 base DPM, because its DPM is going to go up into about the 2,600 mark base as soon as you start penetrating high explosive rounds. Now think of it like this. Have you had the pleasure of, or even the pain of driving around some of those new French-wheeled light tanks recently and just dabbing the high explosive key and going to town on your opponents? Well, you can do exactly the same with this vehicle. It's just this thing's got 102mm of penetration, when most of the French-wheeled light tanks are kind of only packing 90 until you get to the top tier EBR 105. Alright, so we see that there's a T-44 and an HWK 30 who are harassing around the southern flank. Now clearly I don't want to get caught out in the open. What I want to do instead is to try and make a flanking play, either to try and find the ARL V39 or the Hummel on the enemy team, or alternatively try and get the side of the Jagdtiger to be able to take out that flank. I just noticed there's a blooming great big pit under there. I'm glad I didn't fall in that. That would have been a disaster. The first time I've been in that location on the map. And the enemy team are actually doing a great job here because the T-44-100 managed to actually advance straight in. Now we bounce, I believe, a standard round there off the Jagdtiger. Now we're going to be firing a heat round with 250, which should be able to go right through the upper superstructure of this tank. They were shooting out. I'm just getting a bit distracted there about how that 45 TP thought that you had to drive at a Jagdtiger. Yeah, we're going to have to do some serious carrying here if we want to get through this one. But we're also going to need Wargaming's edge modeling to be on point. Are we going to be able to hit this Jagdtiger finally? Yes, we are. There we go. Completely locked down right now. One more shot should be able to finish him off. And so, now what do I want to do? Well, what I want to do is take a look and see that my allies are falling left, right, and center. And we lose a 40 TP to the Hummel, and we see there's another 40 TP who's on low hit points. And so what I need to do right now is to get forwards and try and punish this T-44-100 as much as I can. But unfortunately, he manages to get behind 3 vehicles. Nice driving there by the T-44-100. And I just missed, I think, my opportunity to be able to win this game, ladies and gents. I can't see how I'm going to be able to come back into this one, considering we're dealing with so many medium tanks with the support of the Hummel. There you go. The Hummel hits us, and we bounce a heat round there off the spaced armor that the T-44-100 has. I need to hit his front plate if I want to penetrate his hull armor. He actually doesn't shoot me quickly, so I'm going to have the drop on him for the second shell. But one thing that's incredibly frustrating is considering that I have used that med kit. Keep in mind what's going to happen now. I lose my driver, boys and girls, and even though we shut down the T-44-100 there, now we don't have a driver in this 2 versus 3 scenario, and I am just like a big fat slug in this tank without a driver. I guess I need to have jack of all trades on my commander so he can take over when somebody's been knocked out. Oh, artillery, with your stun mechanics forcing me to use my medkits and then leaving me unable to be able to participate in the rest of the game. Really fun, right? Nevertheless, we're going to give this a good go anyway. What do I need to do? Now, the T-150 says help, and I press affirmative, letting him know that I'm going to try to not abandon him. But I'm just so slow that I can't get up on this ridgeline, and I'm not going to be able to use that wonderful 10 degrees of gun depression that I have to be able to engage the HWK, and an ARL just appears, but 339 damage against him. Yeah, it's looking bleak, right, boys and girls? An HWK on the enemy team. We tried to blind fire around at the ARL. The Hummel narrowly misses us. I'm trying to finish off the ARL here instead of the HWK if he's going to appear. Or am I just going to shoot the guy in the turret? Don't actually pen the high explosive round there. Wonder where we actually hit that shot. Should we go and take a look on his armor as to how we failed to be able to penetrate that shot? I don't see where the splash is. Maybe it's not rendering. Maybe he was just driving upwards and we fired up at his hull armor and somehow it worked out for him there. So we don't actually manage to be able to penetrate him in that position. Nevertheless, not a bad round for this vehicle. 5,000 damage and 700 assistance. That's a sterling result for a light tank, and was enough to result in an ace tanker for the vehicle. Although I played this just after release, so it's probably still not too challenging to get aces in this tank. Nevertheless, a high caliber 898 base, which actually then gets 50% added on top of that. So that would have been 2,300 experience with a premium account if we won. Nevertheless, we still make a decent profit, although it looks like I was using a credit booster at this time, but 150,000 credits, not too bad. Those high explosive rounds are cheap. They only cost 350 credits, and when you're putting in 320 alpha damage, and also hopefully doing a substantial amount of crits to the enemy team, you are swimming in it. However, be warned that as soon as you start dabbing that 2 key in this tank, when you get into the bad matchups of this vehicle, will definitely get into 4,000 credits to deal 240 damage, and sometimes even bouncing it because it's 250 millimeters of penetration is really frustrating. And so all in all, what do I think about the HWK 30? Well, here's the thing. Remember, when we were comparing the statistics of this vehicle to the Black Dog or the M4190, whatever you want to be calling it, it's more accurate, but it's kind of got worse gun handling. It has more gun depression, kind of has the same mobility, a little bit worse traverse, better view range. I wouldn't say that it's better than the Black Dog, but it is at least as good as the Black Dog. And the funny thing about the HWK30 is that if we just take the Black Dog out of the picture here and we compare it to the Tier 9 standard German light tank, the IU-251, which it very closely resembles, we quickly see that it's practically got identical damage per minute. Its penetration is a little bit less, but if you dab the 2 key, you've got the same penetration as the IU-251. You've got the same great high explosive rounds. Your turret traverse dispersion is a little worse. Your aim time is a fraction worse. Your mobility, a little bit worse, and of course you have less hit points, but you have the same view range. This vehicle it's too good for its tier. Wargaming have taken a tank that was just too good, aka the black dog. And because I guess they feel pressured now to sell new tanks, at least in my opinion, they've made the HWK 30 statistically too strong. It's if we compare it to, for example, the HWK 12, you're clearly going to see how it is better in practically every single way. Wargaming, please stop releasing premium tanks that are just flat out better than their standard counterparts. Just because the M4190, a relic from times past when it had tier 9 matchmaking, is still in the game, don't release new tanks that are meant to kind of compete with it equally. If anything, the M4190 should no longer be sold because it's just too good when it has tier 8 matchmaking. And this release of the HWK 30 is in essence just power creep, or the fact that Wargaming feel that they have to compete with premium tanks that should be relics in the game. So should you get yourself an HWK 30? Well, Frontline is starting up again on Monday, and if you fancy having a light tank to be able to use in it and still make loads of credits at the same time, then this is a great vehicle for it. Its standard rounds are decent at long range, and its high explosive rounds are fantastic against lightly armored targets. This thing really does wreck Scorpions and French-wheeled light tanks, and unlike the French-wheeled light tanks, this thing has very good view range. And so if you always wanted to play a tank like the M4190, but for some reason have never been able to catch it when it's on sale, then this is definitely a great premium tank. But if you already have an M4190, I really don't think you have anything to worry about. While this vehicle is definitely as good as the M4190, it's not flat out better. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for another World of Tanks showcase right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And this week, 965 of you voted, and the majority want to see the Super Conqueror. Yeah, I get to play British heavies today, boys and girls. And so come along right now as I start at Tier 1 and work my way up towards Tier 10, where you're going to get to see possibly the best tank that you can get outside of Clan Wars for working a ridgeline. And if you've never been to one of my Tech Tree showcases before, they're basically like miniature tank reviews all the way up, so you can see if it's a line that's worth grinding, or alternatively, if you already have the tanks, pick up a few tips and tricks along the way. So I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.